The Golden Stallion is here for something I wanted to do actually a few days ago, but I didn't have the opportunity. And kind of unfortunately, even though I'm sure I could find a mirror somewhere, it's really not that important because I was just going to, thrash the whole article anyway. So I have promoted through the various channels that I have a book, actually a new translation of a book that I consider to be the most important anarchist work ever written, that being The Ego in Its Own, and the newest translation being The Unique and Its Property by Wolfi if I'm not pronouncing his last name right, I apologize, which is the newest translation. I've talked about it on Sovryn Tech proper, on Sovryn Tech Prime. I've given a review of it recently. I think it was not the July, maybe it was the July hangout. No, I think it was one of the June hangouts where I gave my review of The Unique and Its Property, of that particular translation. And I have some degree of problems with it, all of which you can kind of, you can hear. I don't have any necessarily problems with the translation itself. I have some problems with the interpretation that Wolfi gives it in the beginning. I think Wolfi's translation skills are perfectly fine. I'm also a fan of his translation from 2012 of Stirner's Critics. I talked about all this in the past on Sovryn Tech. So I don't want to, retread some old ground here. What has happened out of this is that the book, The Unique and Its Property, was published by a publishing house called Underworld Amusements, which, full disclosure, I have purchased many a book from. And I will, talk about this and I'll break into this, which is run by a person named Kevin Slaughter. Kevin Slaughter is a person who, as late, and I mean, really, Kevin Slaughter has been involved in anarchism and egoism and all that for decades. But Kevin Slaughter, as late, has been very supportive, it would appear, of various right-wing, perhaps alt-right aspects of the political spectrum. And, so something that happened is that a guy named Dr. Bones of some kind of blog called Conjure House, who the fuck knows who this moron is, okay, and I'm not saying Kevin Slaughter's any better, came out and said, the unique in its the unique in its property. This is terrible. Wolfi, who is this well-respected anarchist / egoist, is working with the alt-right. He's taking egoism away from its true roots, which Dr. Bones of Conjure House was claiming that egoism's true roots is communism. We need to explain that a lot better. A lot of people did not care to get into the nuance of that. And so then this starts spreading around, and when The Unique in Its Property, that book, when that edition came out, and it just came out at the end of May, like May 24th or something, I think, May 24th, 2017, I was one of the first people to get a copy. That's not a boast, I'm just saying. A lot of people afterwards started really jumping on board with it, and everybody was getting their hands on a copy, and I'm really glad to see that. I'm glad to see egoism spreading. For those that don't know, and this shouldn't be anything new to most Sovryn Tech listeners, but I consider myself an egoist anarchist, even though that's a term that some people have problems with. We may talk about that as we go through this. But I want to address this whole situation because I think a lot of people used it in libertarian / anarchist communities. They used it to debunk the very notion of egoism itself. They used it to say that, see, egoism's just communism, like this is bad, come on back to the anarcho-capitalist fold, or some horse shit like that. And so that's part of why I'm, kind of breaking this down. And look, I don't want this to be long. Of course, I get very wordsy, so maybe it will end up being that way. But also, this is not, I refuse for this to be some kind of, this is real egoism, that's not real egoism, blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm not even interested in that. In fact, really, Dr. Bones, who is, Kevin Slaughter, like I say, is certainly, no prize here. But Dr. Bones, who, in my opinion, is kind of the villain in this story. And in fact, the article that I'm talking about is gone. Like, it's been taken down from Conjure House, probably because there was a response, and a fantastic response, by Wolfi Landstreicher himself, that really wiped the floor with Dr. Bones and Kevin Slaughter and just about anybody that had any of these critiques. And I will be reading some of that response because I just thought it was so beautiful. And, Wolfi is such a great writer. I'm not saying I agree with Wolfi 100% on things. Like I already said, I disagree with some of his interpretation of the ego on its own. But anyway, but yeah, I don't want this to turn into that sort of thing, because like I said, Dr. Bones, he already is like making it something else. He's kind of like how you have anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-capitalism, anarcho-communism, blah blah blah. And there's the dash in there. He seems to, with his Conjure House blog, which who the fuck knows how big a deal that is. I'd never heard of it until a few days ago. He's making the claim of egoist communism. Okay, just like I guess you could say there's egoist anarchism. He's saying there's egoist communism. So he's really the one who's adding on a term, very much to egoism. And so I don't really see this as a battle versus like what's real egoism and what isn't. He's the one that's already kind of shifting the term and creating his own term for it and creating his own interpretation. Not that Dr. Bones is alone. There are lots of people in various, you could just look on Facebook and various egoist groups who very much think that egoism is all about communism. And I guess maybe we could start with that. Is just discussing, that whole issue. Then we can talk more about Underworld Amusements, Kevin Slaughter, and Wolfi, and Dr. Bones, and how all that comes together. So if Stirner, if Stirner's work, if the ego in its own or the unique in its property, and I will use those terms kind of interchangeably unless I say I'm directly talking about one translation. But I guess, I'll use the ego in its own because at the time that I'm talking about, the time frame I'm going to discuss here for a moment, that would have been what kind of more or less the title that, that these people would have experienced. So set the Wayback Machine for the 19th century, particularly, I guess this would have been written around, the 1840s, by Frederick Engels and Karl Marx, of course, largely the founders of communism, of all concepts of communism. Here's a funny thing, okay? You would think, and I mean, this is just such a basic, knockdown of this whole idea that egoism purports communism. You would think that if the ego in its own, if Stirner was a communist, that, Karl Marx would have praised his work. But that doesn't happen. In fact, there's now a very popular book. It wasn't originally published at its time. I don't think it ended up really getting published until the 1930s. But there's the book, The German Ideology, which takes its time kind of attacking all sort of the young Hegelians, a lot of the different philosophers, that came out of Germany, or that were in Germany throughout the 19th century. And Marx, and a lot of people feel that Marx completely eviscerates the ego in its own, which it doesn't. But that's a huge conversation. Like, you kind of have to go line by line and have plenty of context to really, cover the reality around that. But in my opinion, as someone who has read Marx's work and who is not like a total, I don't totally hate Marx. I don't like him either, but I get some of what he has to say, and I appreciate some of his mentality. He does not support. He spends this whole time writing how Stirner is wrong. So when the father of communism says that the father of egoism, just using those general terms, isn't a communist, I mean, what? like what, what fucking argument do you fucking have to say that egoism is communism? And also when you read The German Ideology, Marx makes it very clear that egoism is also not militant. In fact, let's break this down a little bit, because that book, The German Ideology, wasn't just written by Karl Marx. Again, Frederick Engels was a part of it as well. Now, the nice thing about Frederick Engels is that he was, to some degree, an acquaintance. I don't know if I'd call it a friendship It's tough when you're looking at it through, kind of this historical perspective. But Engels is an acquaintance and a contemporary of Max Stirner, and would hang out with Max Stirner, which would explain how, Marx would have ever even found out, about Stirner and his work and all that, among other things. So, and that's probably why, Engels gets kind of the byline with the whole thing, because he actually hung out with the Hegelians, in the 19th century. So let's see. Here we have, there's a poem by Frederick Engels himself, and in it he talks about Stirner. He calls him the noble Stirner, which is interesting. But I'll read it. I'll read the relevant part to you here. Look at Stirner. Look at him. The peaceful enemy of all constraint. Now, Stanley breaking in. I love that. The peaceful enemy of all constraint. That tells you everything about Stirner, honestly, right there. This is an independent party. Someone who holds beliefs different from Stirner, is kind of in opposition, but yet has sort of respect for his philosophical enemy, and says the peaceful enemy of all constraint. That line alone is almost saying, yeah, this whole idea of militantism, of violence and all this with Stirner. I've talked about this so many times every time I talk about Stirner, because so many people are like, oh, well, this says, why are there all these memes with Stirner with an AK-47? Well, they're fucking wrong. Like, they're just dead fucking wrong. And I think they probably haven't even read half of The Ego in Its Own, and they haven't read anything beyond that as far as egoism goes. That's for fucking sure. And there's plenty of books about egoism. I'll list some of them off. Okay, it's not, Max Stirner's work is not the only work on egoism, even though it is in many ways the cornerstone. Okay, I'll start reading this again, and I won't interrupt it this time, or I'll try not to. Look at Stirner. Look at him. The peaceful enemy of all constraint. For the moment, he is still drinking beer. Soon he will be drinking blood as though it were water. When others cry savagely, "Down with the kings!" Stirner immediately supplements, "Down with the laws also." Stirner, full of dignity, proclaims, "You bend your willpower and you dare to call yourselves free. You become accustomed to slavery. Down with dogmatism, down with law." And that's the quote. Now, you may be wondering, what is this soon he will be drinking blood as though it were water? What it is Engels' jab at the peaceful enemy of all constraint. It is Engels saying, Stirner, you don't understand. If you get rid of everything, the dogmatism, the law, if you get rid of all the spooks, as Stirner would call them, you're going to end up with bloodshed. Like, there's just, everybody's going to be killing everybody. It's going to be warlords. It's going to be madness. It's going to be Chuck Heston and Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse. The whole thing, right? That's what he's saying. Not that Stirner himself was going to get violent and, be awash in blood personally. Just that's what would happen, is that in Engels was critiquing Stirner with that statement, saying that in your world, even though you're peaceful, in your world, everybody else is not, and it's just, there's going to be blood on the streets everywhere. That's a fascinating, there's a whole poem there. It's a fascinating thing to read. But there you have a contemporary of Stirner himself describing how Stirner is, how he just kind of sits there, just sort of takes the world in as it comes at him. And how in fact, I use it all the time to kind of describe myself, and on certain social media, I'll use it as, like for my description, the peaceful enemy of all constraint. And I love that because it's jabbing, it's attacking religion, politics, social norms, social mores, the whole thing. When you say all constraint, it's beautiful. Well done, Engels. I can see why people, dug your work, because you're a hell of a writer. Even though, look, I have a billion problems with what Frederick Engels thinks. Okay, don't misunderstand me. So, but there you have, here it is. You have the people that, in many ways, created what people considered to be communism, and certainly the critique, the people that verbally attack or critique, egoism and Stirner today, would consider the creators of communism. They hate Stirner. They hate his work. What the fuck are you talking about? It's just not there. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about Dr. Bones. So reading from Dr. Bones' own website, The Conjure House, which, whatever the fuck, I don't give a shit and I don't recommend following the site for anything. When he talks about egoist anarchism, let's see exactly what he means here. Here's a direct quote from, and I'll put the link in the show notes if you feel so inclined. When I speak of communism, I'm not, this is Dr. Bones talking here, I'm not talking about the surrendering of property to some spooky and religious us, quote unquote us, that dictates our behavior. I'm talking about the goal of communization, existence without exchange, money, commodities, etc. I'm talking about the working class itself ceasing to exist as the working class. This is the communism by the people involved with it for their benefit. Okay, so, when people were saying, oh, you see, egoism leads to communism, fuck, even Dr. Bones isn't talking about communism. I mean, it's ironic that he wears, like the one picture or the picture you can get of Dr. Bones, he's wearing a bandana, a scarf over his face, and it's red and it has, the hammer and sickle, the whole Soviet symbol and everything. But even Dr. Bones isn't talking about, and this post that I just read from, it's called Egoist Communism, What It Is and What It Isn't. It's from June 2017. It's not like he even had time to change his mind. But he's not even talking about like Marx or, Engels, like that kind of style of communism. He's saying, no, you're not going to like turn over all the property or whatever. It's just about the decapitalization of everything. And I don't, I'm not saying I agree with him. I'm just saying that he's not fucking talking about communism. Okay. So, this Dr. Bones guy, all over the fucking place, and he got his ass handed to him by the response that Wolfi Landstreicher, the translator of The Unique in Its Property, which is the problem in question here because it went through Underworld Amusements, which the claim is that it's a fascist book publisher. I mean, like when Wolfi came back on it, I mean, he just destroyed every argument that that Dr. Bones made. And Wolfi came right out and said that he has detached himself from Kevin Slaughter and from Underworld Amusements. And he, as far as I know, he released The Unique in Its Property, his translation, completely out for free. So he doesn't even care if he doesn't make any more money off of it. He's just like, here, you can pirate it. Go for it. I mean, he did the anarchist due diligence. I mean, it's the best possible response you could get to all of this bullshit that Dr. Bones ran with. Again, I think it's ridiculous and it's hilarious how little libertarians and ANCAPs have any fucking understanding, okay, of Stirner, or not all, but most have any understanding of Max Stirner, of egoism, and all that. And it's not just egoists themselves, obviously, like Dr. Bones and like so many others that I see online. Like I said, every time I see a meme with Stirner holding an AK-47, I laugh my fucking ass off, and I'm like, you idiot. You have no clue, and it's not even up to interpretation. You have no idea who the hell you're talking about. I mean, yes, there are people, again, like Dr. Bones, do interpret egoism in different ways, of course. But I'm just saying, what would Stirner be? He'd be the guy sitting in the back of the bar, not even drinking, drinking, let's see, how did he put it? Where's that poem again? He's drinking his beer and, the peaceful enemy of all constraint. So, yeah, there's Stirner for you. Anyway. I want to get into the response from Wolfi about this, and like I said, I'm so livid, and I understand why a lot of people were like, whoa, and people shared it with me and tried to get my attention about it, saying, hey, like, this is a problem, egoism, not such a good thing. This unique in its property, maybe there's some real problems here, blah 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 blah. No, there's no problems, and I understand, and I actually appreciate people bringing it to my attention and wanting me to talk about it. And that's why I'm here doing a little podcast about it. So, in fact, there was even some discussion of it in the Sovereign Tech Uncensored Facebook group. And everybody there, I appreciate everything they had to say and, their criticism, critiques, and what they had to bring up. Yeah, I mean, I think Wolfi, his response really kind of knocked it all out of the park. And I almost felt like, I don't even really need to do this. First off, like, I can't do a breakdown of what, I read the article previously, but now that the article on Conjure House is gone, I can't really do a breakdown of it. But, we can get into it here. That's fine. But I want to read some of Wolfi Landstreicher's, who is the person in question here. Some of his response to this whole thing, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll put a link in the show notes for it so you can check it out. I'll start here. So this is reading from Wolfi. I still think that Kevin Slaughter and Underworld Amusements are mainly lumpanics, but Kevin Slaughter seems to have some friendliness toward certain right-wing and bigoted movements that I find contemptible, just as Dr. Bones seems to have some friendliness toward totalitarian left-wing movements. Look at the scarf he wears in his website picture that I find contemptible. So I am breaking off my long-distance interaction with Kevin Slaughter of Underworld Amusements. I have never, to my knowledge, had any contact with Dr. Bones. My anarchic and egoistic ways of encountering my worlds have always been anti-political, and I don't want to have anything to do with the shit heap of politics of any sort or anyone who might pull me there, whether intentionally or not. I have told Kevin Slaughter that I do not want him to do another edition of the Stirner translation, nor to do another book that he offered to do of my material. I've told him not to send me anything more, books, etc. I have also sent my files for the book to several friends and publishers to spread as they see fit to encourage pirate editions. That's what I was just talking, Stallion breaking in, that's what I was just talking about, where he's like, here, okay, well, I have a problem with Underworld Amusements. I'll give the book away for free, and they can't, and they don't need to make any more money off of it. Fucking awesome. Reading on. The break with Kevin Slaughter will most likely also make me lose my friend of nearly 30 years, but that is how it goes sometimes. However, Dr. Bones and his crypto-Stalinist, communist egoist henchmen, quote-unquote communist egoist, should not get into their heads that they have won any victory. The doctor has exposed himself for what he is. He clearly gets pleasure witch hunting like the totalitarians whose symbol he proudly displays. He seems to know he doesn't have what it takes to take on the state, capitalism, cops, etc. So he decides instead to go for someone he knows makes very little use of the internet and makes his attack through this medium. So I have to assume he's a coward as well as a bully. His use of innuendo, distortion, blatant lies blended with bits of truth, cheap shots, senility, being senile. Really? Perhaps the good doctor should worry that some of his politically correct friends will call him out for his ageism. I just think it's absurdly funny coming from a halfwit, and barely veiled death threats all fit in with his scarcely hidden crypto-Stalinism. Wearing a bandana designed like the flag of the totalitarian Marxist regime of the USSR is pretty telling. As I've said, the internet is the perfect medium for this sort of witch-hunting campaign, a sort of campaign that also feeds very well into the interests of the authorities. Ultimately, I know this will be a tempest in a teapot. Dr. Bones may choose to call me enemy. I choose to call him nothing but a dim-witted crypto-Stalinist fool. If you want to pass yourself off as an anarchist, don't wear the symbols of a totalitarian state on your face, and be done with them. Yesterday, in an email not intended for public viewing, though it apparently got posted on one public site, I said that I was going to drop out of public anarchist projects. I have since decided that would be the wrong way to deal with this. Dr. Bones is a pathetic bully, and I won't back down before such crap. I've seen certain things happen at anarchist book fairs and similar gatherings that show that the upholders of politically correct moralizing can be violent toward those who don't conform to their party line. So if I go to such gatherings, it will be with care and with good friends who will have my back. I will continue my other projects, and those with whom I have done projects can decide for themselves whether they are willing to continue to have me be involved with their projects. I know they will let me know, and some already have. To end this, a bit of a declaration, and Stallion breaking in, I think this is beautiful. I have nothing, or mostly beautiful. I have nothing but contempt for all racism and all racists, no matter who they are. I have nothing but contempt for all nationalism and all nationalists, and these days that isn't politically correct, or that isn't political correct. I have nothing but contempt for all fascism and all fascists, including the red fascists who hide behind their hammer and sickle. And I also have nothing but contempt for all political systems and those who uphold them. Democracy and Democrats, republics and Republicans, socialism and socialists, communism and communists. And I will add in here, though it is technically not a political system, capitalism and capitalists. Now I want to stop there for 1 second. He is very clear. The translator, who even I disagreed somewhat with his interpretation of the ego in its own, the translator of the unique in its property made it very clear that egoism does not support communism and that he doesn't support it. Reading on. I live my life for myself, creating it as I see fit to the extent of my abilities. In this sense, I encounter my worlds egoistically. I relate to others as individuals, not in terms of categories, except to the extent that they embrace a categorical identity, whether through proclamation or through their choice of identifying symbols. And I recognize that any freedom that is not a mere abstraction has to rest in individual autonomy. In this sense, I encounter my worlds individualistically. I refuse to be ruled to the extent that I have the strength, and so also to rule, since all rulers are ruled by the system of ruling. In this sense, I encounter my worlds anarchistically, and I have no need for a god in my worlds. So in this sense, I encounter my worlds atheistically. I don't have time to waste any more on someone who is either a complete nitwit, utterly unaware of the significance of the symbols he displays and the methods he uses, or, as I strongly suspect, a crypto-Stalinist half-wit trying to appear as an anarcho-communist egoist. Dr. Bones is not a worthy foe, so he gets no more of my time. If I get around to it, I may also write the Declaration of Independence from politics. I promised, but I am done with dealing with an ideological idiot's shit-slinging. And signed, of course, Wolfi Lundstrecker. Now, I want to read. I want to read a little bit more, but because some people may be wondering, well, how did he not know about Kevin Slaughter? How did he not know about what Underworld Amusements is doing, et cetera, et cetera? Now, he hints at it in what I just read, from his response to you. Again, link is in the show notes, and it was published on anarchistnews.org. But Wolfi barely interacts with the internet. In fact, there's a lot of guys that I have a ton of respect for, frankly, and even people that are very tech savvy. Think like Paul Rosenberg, some others, who also don't. I mean, you're lucky if you can get an email to them. Even though they're incredibly knowledgeable on how all this stuff works, and they're not idiots by any stretch of the imagination. So he didn't know because he doesn't have all the tools that the witch hunters, as he's so aptly named, do for looking into other people. So. Why don't I want to read a little bit about how he talks about why he doesn't, what his interaction with the internet is, because I think this is interesting, and this might be interesting to Sovereign Tech listeners particularly. So this is the start of it. Yesterday morning, Sunday, July 16th, 2017, so you know when the date of this is, it's July 17th, I received 2 emails from 2 different sources with a link to a diatribe on a website called The Conjure House, denouncing me because of the publishing house that published my translation of Stirner's The Unique and Its Property. Had I not received these emails, I would have known nothing of this because I choose to have a minimal relationship with the internet. The internet originated in military research. Its functioning makes it an ideal tool for police work, gathering, extracting, combining, twisting, and inventing information, quote-unquote, information that may have some relations to actual existence or not, but that can cast the appearance of, quote-unquote, guilt on whatever target one chooses. I assume from the start that everything that goes on the internet goes into the hands of cops of one sort or another, so when I do use the internet, I do it with care. After all, I do not want to accidentally incriminate myself, nor to accidentally snitch on someone else, whether to state cops or to the wannabe cops of political correctitude in anarchist circles. Ooh, stallion breaking in. How about that? Both self-incrimination and accidental snitching seem to be frequent occurrences in internet interactions. That is why in this statement, which I am writing so that others who choose to can post or republish this, the only names you will see are, and he goes down all that. Anyway, but my point in reading that is I think that's a very fascinating and not wholly inaccurate, interpretation of the internet and of online communications in general. The idea that no matter what he types, it's going to end up in some kind of authoritarian's hands, be it one that works for the state or an authoritarian, perhaps like Dr. Bones. I think, wow, what an intelligent fellow, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying that I want to run off like that. I mean, one of the reasons, I'll just say this quickly, this isn't necessarily relative to this. One of the reasons I wanted to do the Sovereign Tech newsletter is because I want to get my entire audience on board with the technology that, again, is federated, does not have a central server, is not centrally controlled in any way, and is already, has a stand, the code is done and done. Email is as old as the internet. It's as or about as old as the internet, and it's just it's a proven technology. There's nothing more that's going to get done with it, and nobody can really. I mean, you can make money off of it if you're like Google, scanning through ads, even though apparently they've stopped that, or scanning through to feed you proper ads, whatever. But it's an open technology that just exists out there. In many ways, it's one of the ultimate open technologies. And I'm not saying there aren't problems with email. I'm just saying that in general, it is that form of communication, I think, that will stand the test of time very well and will just kind of always be there, and will always be popular. Just kind of like phone numbers, even though phone numbers are pretty ridiculous, and certainly companies like Google and others have tried to get rid of them. So yeah, I get it. I get what he's saying, and I really appreciate that perspective. And frankly, if money were no object, I'm not saying a world without money. I'm saying if I didn't need if I didn't have monetary concerns, I might go to the time where, yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, email me. I'm not going to be anywhere else, But anyway, let's get back to talking about egoism here. Yeah, I think that Wolfi's response again was perfect, and it raises a point that I mean it's kind of subconsciously there, and this is an opinion that actually Wolfi, maybe Kevin Slaughter, and Dr. Bones, I know explicitly shares. That is that egoism actually isn't even like anarchism. Like egoism is something that stands above all of that. Like that, even the notion that anarchism isn't an ideology. I mean, the argument goes kind of like atheism, like that atheism isn't a religion because there's no, like it's saying there's no religion. So how can it be something that there isn't anything of, right? Well, like it's the non-stamp collector argument, right? And that, some people would say, well, anarchism is the anti-ideology because it's saying, that there's sort of no ideology, a political ideology, of course, more particularly. So egoism would claim that it even kind of stands above hedonism, like it just stands above everything and, merely addresses the individual and the individual alone. So even saying that you're an egoist anarchism or an egoist anarchist is like a misnomer, like almost an oxymoron. And that Stirner would have never called himself an anarchist. That last statement's probably true. There seems to be, evidence for that. And people get into the argument saying like, look, read these works by egoists, from 100 years ago or 200 years, whatever, or 100 years ago. And you'll see like, even they're considered crazy by the anarchists, just like Engels and Marx considered Stirner to be crazy. It's an interesting, yeah. I mean, I get it. I'm not about to toe that line. Like I have no problem with really, I generally don't have a problem with the term anarchist. It's a huge umbrella term. It can take on so many different meanings. It can, refer to Wolfi as well as Dr. Bones, apparently, even though, well, actually Dr. Bones, I guess, wouldn't even call himself an anarchist. He's an egoist communist. Well, but I get it. Like I understand that perspective, that egoism is something that stands completely above anarchism, that in a way anarchism either can be or is antithetical to some degree to egoism. But anyway, whatever. For the sake of simplicity and for not arguing, I don't see any contradistinction between like egoism and anarchism. I consider them really to be part and parcel. On social media, I will use the term egoist anarchist, and I've said this many a time. I do that because it's just to make sure. Look, I'm not one of those other guys. I'm not a Dr. Bones. I'm not Hoppe. I'm not, go down the list of whoever, I'm not one of these people. I'm not in their camps. And that's why I do that. So otherwise I would just use the term anarchist, and rock and roll and have a good time. And, I think it's interesting. I love how Wolfi's bringing up, I've been to various anarchists, like, book events, book gatherings and all this different stuff. And there have been some crazy shit that goes on. It's such a pity. It's such a shame that so many, and I know I talk to these people. I live near them. Okay, so many like ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalist libertarians and whatever, like they think there's so little going on with anarchism most of the time. There's tons of shit going on with anarchism all the time, all around the world. One of the podcasts I've recommended people listen to, it's kind of infrequent, almost defunct by now, I think, but is Crime Thinks, the Ex-Worker podcast. You listen to that, and like every episode, they have a billion things where there's a billion different marches or protests or some other, horse shit going on or whatever with anarchists. Anarchism is more than capitalism, folks. Deal with that. And there's a lot going on all the time. Like there really are a lot of people who, it's not a lot of people. I don't know if it's a statistically relevant number, but there's way more, people that are anarchists that aren't ANCAPs. And they're doing stuff around the world. But, I think ANCAPs are just so like America-centric or like maybe Germany-centric or something like that. Just drives me up the wall. Like you guys and gals, you're missing so much that's going on in the world, that whether you agree with their ideology, with their underlying ideologies or what their end game may be or whatever, you don't have to, but understand that, there's a lot more people than you realize who are really into stateless shit. And I know this for a fact. I have communists that listen to my show. I have communists listening to my voice right now because I know it. They're patrons. And I think you do yourself a disservice if you just kind of write those people off. You want to write off people like Dr. Bones because they're talking about, wanting to do some really violent and being militant and all that shit. Fine. Okay. But there's lots of people with a lot of different ideologies that aren't tankies, that aren't looking to do violent shit and whatever. But just because they don't like markets, you think that they're some kind of, that they're the scum of the earth or some kind of bullshit. And I think you're the fucking scum of the earth if you think that way. How little the mind that doesn't allow for other economic models, political models, whatever, that don't include violence. And they don't. Stop saying it's like, well, but they don't want anybody to be able to own property. That's inherently violent. What? You can't voluntarily choose to not want to own shit? Who the fuck are you tyrant? Unbelievable. Anyway, I mentioned that I would talk about some other books, egoist books that you could look into. So, because maybe if you're just like, well, but I read Stirner and I didn't get it. All right, well then let's check out some other books here. Unfortunately, let's be clear on this. A lot of these do come from Underworld Amusements, so purchase them at your own risk. I didn't know the shit about Kevin Slaughter either. I probably won't be buying any more books from Underworld Amusements. In fact, let me take a moment to talk about that. Because people do misconstrue egoism to allow for fascism. Okay, in fact, this is a big problem, like with the Church of Satan and all that, because Underworld Amusements also publishes a lot of books from the Church of Satan. Church of Satan is not the same as the Satanic Temple or the Temple of Satan, which is well known for getting all those monuments put up everywhere, which I think is just so badass. Very different organization than the Church of Satan. Okay, Church of Satan, of course, started by Anton LaVey, which a lot of people keep telling me I look like him now, especially with my goatee, which, whatever. There's people who have written stuff outside of Anton LaVey's work that kind of promotes fascism in a way. And they use egoism or they use a brand, shall we say, of egoism that says, well, if there's no morality, if there's no right and wrong, if there's none of this, then I can just do whatever I want. I can be Stirner with the AK-47, blah, blah, blah. And I understand that. In fact, even Mussolini read Stirner's work, and Mussolini claimed that the ego in its own was, allowed for kind of, that's OG fascism with Mussolini, right, in Italy. And in fact, a philosopher that I have a ton of respect for, Michel Onfray out of France, he in his book, The Hedonist Manifesto, he actually does an entire chapter, he does a couple chapters about Stirner. And one of them is where he's praising the concept of the union of egoists, which I praise as well. It's one of the most brilliant things that Stirner came up with. And I've talked about it many times. I'm not going to go back down that road right now. But when he's talking about the union of egoists, he says, look, I'm not arguing for egoism because that leads to fascism. So I get it that there's people who say, yeah, well, it's a philosophy that allows for fascism. I think when it's a philosophy that you actually understand, no, it does not. I keep saying this. I really feel like so many people, they get through maybe like 3-4 chapters or something out of the ego in its own or the unique in its property. They never get to the end of the book because there's no, like, fascism is not a part of that program. It's not. So, and, I get that. And I get like where some members of the Church of Satan and all that, make this claim that fascism's okay, being a tyrant and all this shit. Like that's the ultimate expression of might is right. That's a whole other conversation to have. But yeah, so Underworld Amusements certainly does seem to lean towards, even if Kevin Slaughter wasn't into alt-right shit, it does seem to lean towards, because of some of the things that they publish, I think also from the Church of Satan, it does lean towards where their brand of egoism, is something where like they want to, purport and support and propagate some kind of, fascism of some type. But they are also the only people in the world that publish very rare egoist books, quite frankly. So anyway, I want to break some of these down. Now, again, like I said, look, egoism does not really allow for tyranny. In fact, it's part of the reason that Marx and Engels were trying to debunk egoism, is because it gets in the way of what Marx thought was what was necessary to get to the stateless society, that being the dictatorship of the proletariat, where you did have to have a fascist, society for a while. That way you could take over the means of production to where those means of production could then, get to a point of where, to an efficient point of effective, not literal, obviously, because there's no such thing as literal post-scarcity, but of effective post-scarcity. And so, like, that's part of the reason they had to really, like, thrash Stirner's work, because they knew, really, at the end of the day, that Stirner's work would never allow for any kind of tyranny, any kind of fascism. Not when people really get it. So anyway, let's go over some of the titles that you can check out here quick. So in fact, here's our first book. Of course, there's a unique in its property, which translated by Wolfi Landstreicher. And then there's Stirner's Critics, also translated by Wolfi. Those are the two books by Stirner himself. Okay, again, newly translated. In fact, Stirner's Critics, I don't think had ever really been translated so much, so that's very unique. No pun intended. So another book that's out there is a Bible not borrowed from neighbors, essays and aphorisms on egoism, ironically, edited by Kevin Slaughter. The other one is Egoism, the first 2 volumes, 1890 to 1891. And this is a collection of a newsletter, and this is just volume 1. This is a newsletter that was popular, again, in the 1890s, that was all about egoism, and it was an American newsletter. Fascinating reading, that's for sure. And I mean, this is, again, this is a close to Stirner, but post-Stirner egoism kind of being discussed here. I got to be careful when you use the word post, because I'm not saying Stirner was wrong. I'm just saying that it's after Stirner that was done up. And then there's, let's see, what else we got? The Occult Technology of Power, which really doesn't have an author, but that's a fascinating book. In fact, who first, the first time I ever read that book reviewed, it's an old book, but it was Reason Magazine actually did a review of that, thought it was fantastic. The book is like, the Occult Technology of Power, that book is, it's trying to be sort of like, I think, like kind of like the Protocols of the Elder of Zion, which is fictional, which is equally fictional, along with the Occult Technology of Power, where it's trying to like say, okay, this is the handbook that the elites of the world get handed as kids or as young adults or something, explaining to them this is how the world works. And like the whole book has sort of this warning saying, look, it's either we do things this way or everybody's going to end up becoming an egoist and then they'll never accept any kind of tyranny or fascism or any kind of control. It's a really, really cool little read, a very, very small book. Again, the easiest way to get it. Now, I mean, a lot of these are available on Amazon, and I may put a link in the show notes for all of them to get them there. But understand they are published by largely Underworld Amusements. So that choice is up to you. At some point, I want to digitize them, do what Wolfi did, to where there could be pirated editions out there. But I don't have the means for that at the moment. So the other book, and I think this is a very important read, and it's not actually done by Underworld Amusements at all, and a way more academic book than most of the ones I just described. And it's by John F. Walsh, Max Stirner's Dialectical Egoism, A New Interpretation. That book is an excellent kind of foil to Wolfi's introduction just his introduction to Wolfi's introduction translator's introduction in The Unique in Its Property. Excellent foil for that. So I cannot recommend that book more. Maybe if you had to have one book besides The Ego in Its Own and Stirner's Critics, that's the book to own, because I think it gives you a lot of great insight, whether you agree with John Welsh or not. It really gives a lot of great insights into Stirner and the book The Ego in Its Own itself. So anyway, I don't think there's much more to say on all this. I just wanted to make it abundantly fucking clear that egoism in its raw form, it does not, and Stirner clearly was not about communism, was not supporting communism. I think the evidence is abundantly clear on that. And also, that all this stuff about, that really Wolfi Landstreicher and this translation, The Unique in Its Property, has nothing to do with fascism, has nothing to do with the alt-right. And again, Wolfi's response, perfect. You couldn't ask for better. Nobody could have done better, I don't think, as far as what's going on there. And I mean, if when I originally was going to do this show, that was before Wolfi made his response. I was just going to say, look, I don't know what Wolfi's up to. I don't know why he's dealing with these people, but I think that the translation is fine. And I was going to reiterate again that I have some issue with Wolfi's interpretation. Not with his translation. I have problems with his interpretation, saying that really just Stirner was trolling everybody and he didn't really, he was just being sarcastic through the whole book. I don't know that I agree with that. There may be points where that was true, but across the board, I don't think so. I really don't. So anyway, that's it. Just a little bonus content for you. And this did end up going much longer than I expected, but I think it was important to get out there. Again, this isn't one of those what's real, egoism kind of arguments. It's really not. These people clearly take these, being like Dr. Bones or Kevin Slaughter, clearly add on a bunch of things to their notions of egoism. It's just not egoism raw that they're putting out there. So anyway, that's it. New Sex and Science Hour will be out this week. Might be some other Patreon episodes, we'll see. And, of course, an all-new Sovryn Tech that I can't wait to share with you. Got some really, really interesting shit to talk about. I will see you on the other side.